Waikato Regional Council and Bay of Plenty Regional Council. And of course, we are discussing a topic that's very important to us all today, which is our work around the environment and climate change too. So before we start our meeting, our workshop today, I'd just like to open us up with a karakia. Tūtaua mai runga, tūtaua mai raro, tūtaua mai roto, tūtaua mai waho. Kia tauai te mauri tū, te mauri ora ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, tae ki e. Thank you very much, everyone. Just a reminder, this is being live streamed, so this will be available on our YouTube. And we do have some members joining us by Zoom today. We've got Councillor Brown there and also Councillor Crosby too, Stuart Crosby, who's joining us. Hi guys, thank you very much. I'll try to keep an eye on you guys. If you have any questions, just raise your hand. Otherwise, I suggest we get through the separate presentations and then we open up for questions at that stage. So without further ado, I'd now like to hand over to Waikato Regional Council, and we have Councillor Jennifer Nicol, who will be presenting to us today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, and for the time to go through this. I have been a councillor at Waikato Regional Council for the last 5 years so far, and led the Climate Action Committee that entire time. We're really proud of the work that we've done in that space already, but it's really evident that there are pieces of work in which, if we collaborate, are more effective and efficient to do together. And so I'm going around at the moment, all of the districts in the Waikato region, there are 11 of them, but I'm very mindful that this one overlaps with Bay of Plenty Regional Council, and so I think it's just amazing that we've managed to set up this trifecta meeting today. And I'll run through a presentation. It's only about 10 minutes max, I would say, of what we've done, and then perhaps later what Bay of Plenty have done and what you guys are doing, and then we can just have a conversation, because the main objective is to have an elected member to elected member conversation, because our staff are incredibly good at collaborating together, but we tend to get very busy in our own spheres, and so the benefit is when we do this as well. So let's see where it goes. I'll go to the first slide. Just see if that works.
I might just invite our staff, if you'd like to take a seat at the table.
Yeah, please do come to the table. And we'll try one more time if I can get this working. Doesn't quite want to. Yeah, I'll let you know. So our strategy has been to integrate the climate lens over everything that we do, as opposed to doing something separately on the side. And so our long-term plan and our strategic priorities for this whole triennium are up on the slide. And you'll see from the 9 pathways that are in our climate action roadmap, which I'll go through it towards the end, are very, very similar. So if we go next slide. I put a slide in here, it's very wordy, it wasn't the intention that you read it as such, but we started this work largely because of the legislative requirement to do it, as well as the obvious moral reasons why you would listen to scientists. And I'm a scientist by training originally, so I'm really much biased in that regard. But there is a whole raft of legislation that has had some climate considerations put into it over the years, and the most recent and most obvious being the National Emission Reduction Plan and National Adaptation Plan, which has been, I suppose, the most direct. So to deliver on that, if we go to the next slide, our council decided to put climate lens through its whole strategic direction, last triennium and this one. It has changed the templates of its decision-making reports to include climate considerations on mitigation, adaptation and opportunities for leadership. We have put together the strategy document of our own and worked to set up the Climate Action Committee that I've been chairing, as I mentioned, for the last 5 years. Risk and assurance covers it in a deep dive of a risk piece, which is what all organisations should be doing. The CEO's KPIs, by default of it being through the strategy, will be very climate lens aligned. And we have a cross-organisational group of people who come together about once a month to who have helped write this climate action roadmap and who just keep checking in with each other of where things are at, because we track the progress of the 109 commitments through a work plan. So if we go next slide. Over the last 5 years, we've had a lot of different speakers come, and that's been really beneficial to help both the staff and the councillors of both trainees learn about the topic. We've covered a whole raft of different topics, so if you're interested, that's in the pack. We go to the next slide. Regional Council in general, our job is to provide a lot of scientific data. The CMIP 6 data that we have is the local interpretation from what comes from the science that's being talked about, as you hear in the IPCC and the UN work, where the International Plan for Climate Change, to make it relevant to us. And so we've got data on what kind of effects we can be seeing where. We get data on what kind of emissions are happening where in the region, and we did a good collaborative piece where we could break down into districts from that report, so everyone can have their own graphs to look at for their area. And we've obviously done the in-house work that tends to go with organisations tackling this, you know, getting to know what you do yourself before telling other people what to do as well. And we're on track to meet those targets that we've set for 2030 at the moment. But there are some difficulties, of course, that you work through once you get the low-hanging fruit sorted. In the Waikato region, that's our emissions profile. I will just mention that there's a bar graph that's not on that chart, which on the right-hand side, which is the organic soils. So the Regional Council and one of the other district councils does a lot of drainage of especially peatlands, and we've finally gotten to a point with scientists to be confident in the numbers to say what amount they're willing to ascribe to it and what it would be worth. So if you imagine another bar on that chart, which would be about 11%, and all the others get slightly smaller to make room for that bar, then that would be the organic soil emissions. Not in there at the moment from the way that we do the standards of and the measurement of this, but MFE have signalled that it will be, so it's just an up-and-coming topic which you'll read about from time to time, and it's something we really need to tackle because it's a large part of the, we call it Scope 3 emissions, the value chain emissions that are to do with our organisation. But yeah, ultimately we know that agriculture with, say, 80% of that bar is methane, is a large part of the contribution in the Waikato. Transportation is the one I'm really concerned about because we have Hamilton City as the fastest growing city in New Zealand at the moment, and the bus system that the Waikato Regional Council puts on is not yet sufficient to allow people to live in that city easily to get around with that. So people are getting more and more cars, and the emissions in that category are still growing, whereas a lot of the others have some plans in place. And we did just hear from the National Land Transport Plan that there's not any new funding for Hamilton bus system over the next 3 years. So we have some challenges to tackle there. If we go next, the roadmap for us has been a way to communicate to our staff internally where their places and where their contribution matters towards this greater goal, and also for external stakeholders. For I've heard sustainability managers, corporates say how useful information to help them link what they're doing to, and many others to see. Just do a mic swap. Thanks. So if we go to the next slide. The 9 pathways are up there. We'll just go through them really quickly. If I go through the first one, it's water, something that you'd associate quite closely with Regional Council. Next slide. We have a water security strategy in the works. We have freshwater reforms, obviously, you might hear about a lot. Those are some main pieces that would make a big difference in that space. We'll go next one. The coastal marine side, we have just been working through reviewing our coastal plan, and that is quite a bit overdue, so that's had a good up-to-date lens put over it, and obviously we do some other work in the coastal space as well. But if we go next, the biodiversity and biosecurity piece I think is really relevant for this District Council if you want to collaborate with us, because the section of the Rotorua Lakes District Council that is in the Waikato region is largely forestry, whether native or exotic, but our piece there is that there is much more to do. We're looking at a biodiversity accord at the moment with the districts, and also have just boosted through our long-term plan some community funding as well. In biosecurity, you'll be hearing about the clams and about the kalupa and other things that are coming at us as the temperature changes and things become more easy to live in different places. Okay, next slide. Resilience, so the adaptation piece, I mean, if people can't get too on board with some of the emission stuff or the emission pollution stuff, that's hard to see sometimes. The adaptation piece has got to be something that brings districts together, absolutely. And so I'm very aware that the Climate Adaptation Act, as promised, is still not here, and that we should be hearing something early next year from this government. But in the meantime, there are some good examples out there of having those conversations already. We have the Wharekawa 2120 project, which has happened where there was a real good collaborations between Hauraki and Waikato District and Waikato Regional Council recently, and Mana Whenua and the community panel, that they've got a plan for the next 100 years of that mentions, you know, some short, medium and long-term goals for that community, just as an example. But with all of our infrastructure on regional council and flood protection and drainage, we obviously have an infrastructure strategy that we need to start addressing the concerns about some of the subsidence, some of the new engineering standards that make everything really expensive as well, and how people are going to pay for that, and those conversations that need to be had. If we go next slide. We pride ourselves in the Waikato for being quite enabling for renewable energy, especially in the geothermal space. But look, we are preparing a renewed regional energy strategy presently to hopefully coincide quite well with the national energy strategy that will come at some stage. So if we go next slide. We are very much always pushing the right tree, right place message. We do not want to see just pine plantations everywhere type of thing. But for obvious biodiversity reasons and other resilience reasons. We did see in our greenhouse gas inventory for the region that it is very vulnerable, the net target, when you rely too much on forestry. So we've kind of lived through that a bit, watching that change over the years. If we go next, please. The agriculture and soils, some of the peat soils, we have the most peat soils of any region in the country. So that's why there's a place for us to be leading some of that work, and we have got some research underway about different things you can do with land over time. And yeah, in the agriculture space, there's obviously a whole lot of other things happening that some of which still need to come to fruition, but there's a lot of things going on dynamically, I think is the best way to put it. If we go next slide, because I don't want to take too long. So the last pathway is the urban form and transport. So it kind of refers to what I was saying before with Hamilton. We've got certain parts of our region that need some of that densification of living and the transport to support it. Other parts, we're proud to say we are apparently leading in community transport as a region. So keen to explore what's possible there myself, and we'll see what happens in the near future. If we go next slide. Oh, sorry, I almost forgot this one. So obviously we have our own funds, investment funds as well. We try and do those in an ethical way. We have divested from fossil fuels, that type of thing, and we make sure that when we hand out money through grants that they also are considering the climate lens as well. Go next slide. Our progress to date is up there on the slide. It is got a few pieces where we're waiting on government direction. There's a lot of pieces that are underway, but it is a gradual process of just monitoring that over time for our committee at the moment. But that's also why getting others together, like what we're doing here today, and what then our staff can do, through their CEs, then that'd be really good. We go next slide. I just wanted to share one project. It's called the Nature Positive Framework, and that one has been undertaken in order to evaluate how much land that regional council owns we would need to plant up with natives to offset the emissions that we do generate. And so in the whole emissions lingo, there's scope 1, which are your direct emissions, scope 2, which is your purchased energy, and scope 3, which is that value chain piece, and which we have 3 topics, ironically. One is public transport contract that we have mainly around Hamilton and a bit beyond. procurement, which is quite a small category, and we need to get to know a lot better to influence our value chain. And the third topic, which is the peat soils piece. So if we go to the next slide, we have worked out that we'd need to plant 1.4% of the 2,500 hectares that Regional Council owns that is plantable to offset just the Scope 1. It would be 9.6%, or about 140 to 240 hectares, depending on density, to offset Scope 1, 2 and 3 in the public transport piece only. But if you were to want to offset the peat soils as well, you'd be looking at 80,000 hectares. So that's one of those things where the graph gets really tiny and those other categories you were talking about were like insignificant. So I think that gives a good overview of where we understand that we're at. And yeah, I welcome the discussion when we've heard from the other parties, really. But yeah, here to help, here to collaborate.
Thank you very much, Councillor Nicol. It's actually really fantastic to be able to share the work that we're all doing, so thank you very much for taking this initiative. I just wonder if you're happy to answer any questions if there are any?
Yeah, sure, definitely.
Just check if there's any questions from people on what you've had presented. Councillor Brown?
Just on the last slide, thank you, Madam Chair. Tanya, on the last slide, have we, or Waikato Regional Council, considering a mix of fast-growing, short-lived exotics to supplement the carbon in the planting program?
Yeah, so we were asked as a committee whether we wanted to go more in the direction of just for the numbers and going all pine, or whether we wanted a mix like you're mentioning, or the more native and real biodiversity gains straight away, I suppose you could say. And we opted for the latter part, but that's probably not to say that we were saying excluding any of what you just mentioned, that transitional forest. It's just that the opportunities were already there in the full biodiversity gain space, that's where we will have the low-hanging fruit, I suppose, to get started. So that's the way it's trending at the moment. But no, never exclude good ideas.
Thank you. And Councillor Crosby, you have a question?
Oh, yes, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Jennifer. Good to see you. Have you done any early analysis yet of where there are similarities between Waikato and Bay of Plenty, either in terms of their emissions profile and or similar actions that are taken,
so
both in mitigation and adaptation?
I'm fairly sure that our staff know these things that overlap, but kind of what's instigated this getting around the place is the fact that I don't think elected members know the answer to that, if you know what I mean, or know those similarities. So I'm actually really looking forward to seeing the Bay of Plenty presentation. I hear anecdotally, but it's not like they've presented to us and therefore I know, or anything like that, yeah. But let's hope that more of it continues.
Councillor Kiriopa?
How far along are you in determining the carbon credits and what
Yeah,
worth
good question.
that might be?
And by the way, that report and all its workings and the methods is all in the maybe 3 or 6 months ago meeting of the Climate Action Committee, so you can all read the detail there if you like. But I understand that in the November Climate Action Committee meeting, we should be getting a decision paper on perhaps a project to start us off. So hopefully close to reality.
Thank you. And Councillor Winters?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jen, did I hear you say at the start that you have a full committee of council for climate change?
No, we don't have a full committee. We only have strategy and policy as a full committee of the whole, and that has taken over a lot of the adaptation work and updates so far. So on the adaptation side, I would say all councillors are part of that, but the Climate Action Committee still takes that umbrella view of the whole with a subset of, say, half the councillors.
So that committee reports to Stratton Pole?
No, it reports to full council.
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Yeah,
it's a standing committee.
There was a push at the start of the Traineum, Madam Mayor, for us to have a full Climate Action Committee of the whole, and I think we didn't do it, but it reports to my committee, which is operations and monitoring on a quarterly basis. So you're just wondering where it sits in your committee structure, that's all.
Yep, nice standing committee. Yeah, and every council's got their own journey, right? So of what fits for where the elected members are at and where the strategy's at, or even what the strategy is. Yeah.
And I've just got a question myself too. I think definitely one of the things we do need to be collaborating on a bit more is the biosecurity. In particular for us in the Rotorua Lakes, the golden clams situation is quite a scary threat for us. It's terrifying, to be honest, if that gets into our lakes, and obviously we are aware that it's an issue in the Waikato area. But one of the big issues that we have is until it is present in here, there's not really investment into biosecurity actions, and because it can't be like proactive or preventative, it just needs to be trying to fix it. I suppose, is there a strong focus on the golden clam concern in terms of biosecurity risks in managing it within the Waikato area? And do you see that? I know our staff would have had certainly discussions with each other, but do you see that that potentially could be something that us as elected members could also be having discussions with each other, or potentially a working group to make sure that we stay on top of whatever biosecurity hazard comes our way? Previously for us it was catfish.
Sure. No, that seems like a really good suggestion. I think that's the fun outcome potential of this, is that we, as elected members, say what's really keeping us up at night, what's the thing that we want to start something with, and that might evolve to cover other pathways later where we overlap. But I think if we take something quite achievable like that, because we do cover it in our Integrated Catchment Committee, which I'm not a member of, but I do read from time to time their updates or attend. And I am currently the alternate member on the Hauraki Golf Forum, so I've seen some of the work with Kulupa and gotten introduced into the relationship that we have with MPI, starting to manage things at the start, but then it transitioning to the regional council, and obviously how well that's managed at the start has an impact on how the regional council then picks that up, and the kind of rating amount that might be left with to manage that. So really keen to get into the proactive space myself and to pick a topic that would work in that collaborative sense.
Thank you. And Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. Thank you very much. Very interesting. One thing that I may have missed, do you have any policies or regulations on monitoring heavy industry, in particular the new types of heavy industry like pyrolytic furnaces, waste to energy plants, etc.? Have you had any thought around how we're going to manage that?
We don't have any strong policy positions on something like waste to energy, because that was called in from the one that was proposed in Te Awamutu, so yet to be seen there. But we did do some technical research which is available to inform us as well as others on what there is to consider, I suppose, with such an emerging thing. But yeah, I don't have... It's case by case, I suppose.
I ask because we have one south of us at Rainbow Mountain, which is getting close to being consented, my understanding is. So
Oh, thankfully they don't let regional councillors anywhere near the consenting side of things.
Just wondering what your experience was of that.
Yeah, no, I'm not aware of that one or where that's up to, so hard to comment, sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Stavros, Michael.
Sure. Can I ask a question from your graph earlier? It identifies that agriculture contributes 67% of the emissions.
Sorry, could you just repeat
Agriculture.
that? I didn't hear. Agriculture, 67%?
67% of the emissions. Is there any thought given to what is the desirable thresholds and balancing out the need to reduce emissions versus the need to maintain food security? Is there any thought as to what is a desirable level? That, because you can't go to zero, obviously, but so what is the threshold that we're looking at?
Yeah. So we haven't got any policy or thoughts as such on the threshold, but we are aware that some of the other work that we're doing such say the freshwater reforms, have a large impact on emissions as a co-benefit, I suppose, of delivering those. The argument of food security, I mean, there's the NPS of highly productive soils, which obviously we're working through like anybody else is, implementing into the policy framework. But yeah, it's more around, I suppose, getting the balance of knowing what your emissions are so that you can consider what the appropriate response is in order to, at the very least, do your fair share in that sense. And so it'll be a case-by-case thing where, and you'll hear this from industry as well, where there are some, say, because it's agriculture, there are some farms which are very efficient already, and there are a lot of farms where good management practice is happening, and there are some where just getting to good management practice will push them into the efficient piece. And there are always some, it seems, where the good management practice isn't happening and the emissions are very high. And there's, in any sector, a piece where it doesn't make sense to hold on to that. But that is a case-by-case, farm-by-farm type of thing. And that's something where I would say at the moment, industry, whether it be Fonterra or Silver Fern Farms or they are hearing things loud and clear from the market of what they're going for and are looking at how to respond to that. And that's a very large driver in the region.
Thank you. Well, that seems to be all of the questions. Thank you very much for your presentation today and also being so open to answering questions as well.
No, of course. I look forward to the next few and then more conversation. Thank you.
Yes, definitely. So, Bethlehem Regional Council, Kat, are you going to be presenting? Okay, so I'd like to now invite Councillor Kat McMillan to provide a presentation on behalf of Bay Plenty Regional Council. And just while she's going to take her seat in the presenters table, just, sorry, I should have covered this earlier. In case of an emergency, we have a fire exit just outside the door on the right-hand side. There are bathrooms just down the hallway and there's water at the back of the room if you need it. Apologies, it was remiss of me as we may have some new people who are here for the first time. But otherwise, Councillor Kat McMillan, it's a pleasure to hand over to you to talk about the mahi that you are doing at Bay Plenty Regional Council. Thank you.
Tēnā koe. Kia ora koutou, ko Kat McMillan toku ingoa. So just as a start, sort of in terms of committee structure, we're a little bit different to Waikato Regional Council in that we don't have a climate action committee. So our climate work is across the whole organisation, but where it comes up to the governance, as Councillor Winters mentioned, it's monitored through monitoring and ops, and it also sort of straddles our strategy and policy committee, which I'm deputy chair of that, and Councillor Winters is chair of monitoring ops, and also our committee Māori. So climate change, as Jen has said, and as we all know, it kind of it crosses over everything, doesn't it? And everything is interconnected when it comes to climate change. So if I could have the next slide, please. So we first, well, this is my first term on Regional Council, so some of this work, a lot of this work is prior to my time, but in June 2019, Toi Moana, Bay Plenty Regional Council announced a climate change emergency, and the first climate change action plan was actioned in 2019. And then since 2021, climate change has been one of our 3 key objectives. So it's been in all of the reporting and actions across the organisation, it's been a fundamental lens that's put on everything. So every report that comes up to council meeting, whatever the meeting is, it will be benchmarked against what it's doing in the climate change space, and whether it stacks up with that lens across it. So I'll be talking about our long-term plan, climate action plan moving forward, and a little bit about what we've achieved so far. So yeah, this slide's a bit busy, so I'll just pull out a few points. So I suppose in the really big picture sense, we are, as all of us here are, extremely aware of the impacts looming and already commencing in the Bay of Plenty Rohe, and what the outcomes are going to be for the people that live in this region. And very much our partnership with Māori is part of that journey, and how we move forward with a just transition, with adaptation, with mitigation, and how we partner, which is, as Jen said, why we're here today as well. So in terms of our sort of overarching vision with climate change, it's about that long-term resilience. So whatever comes at us in the future, wherever the globe gets with its emission reduction and mitigation, that we are resilient to moving forward in that space, and sustainability, which also obviously includes mitigation as well as that sweet spot with biodiversity and climate action. So our planning, obviously evidence-based science, and always looking at the science and all of the work we do, and the reports and the projects we have, getting the evidence there up front. A big part of that as well with our objectives, so it's getting that adaptation planning based in science, the community awareness, and the community coming on the journey with us. And I think that's one of the key challenges, in that people have so many things that they're grappling with on a day-to-day basis, not to mention the economic state of the country, just getting bread on the table and all of the daily things going to work, that climate change, people almost get sick of hearing about it and they don't want to talk about it. So it's how do we keep our community engaged and aware and along the journey with us, so that they're actually responding in the right way and that we're enabling that as a council. And then with our economy, so how does the economy transition to a sustainable and viable economy through climate change, mitigation, adaptation? Next slide, please. Thanks. So with our long-term plan, we've got 5 sort of key goals. The first one is kind of in-house, so I won't really touch on that. It's about our own emissions and what we're doing. Second one is about reducing regional greenhouse gas emissions. So in terms of our partnering with iwi, business and communities and councils, to reduce emissions, so all of the work we're doing in that space, and then with our public transport and spatial planning, also really key. Goal 3 is about how we're preparing for and adapting. So those, as I touched on before, the adaptation conversations, and then the things that complement with biodiversity and climate, and as I said before, that sweet spot. So really finding things, if we can nail biodiversity, we're nailing climate at the same time, not just with emissions reduction, with sequestration, but also with resilience and adaptation and all of those things that go with that. So we look quite deep under the bonnet into those win-win situations there. And goal 4 I touched on as well, taking people of the Bay of Plenty on the journey with us, so that they're understanding what's happening, what needs to happen, what they can do, and that they're not afraid, but they're confident and moving in the right space. And then 5 is a new goal, and that's about the economic transition. So kind of 2 aspects for that. The land use change, innovation and adaptation, and that kind of talks a bit to your question, Stavros, about where can we, as a council, enable innovation in land use change. What are the opportunities and the low-hanging fruit? Where are the case studies? What could the future look like for our land use, and how can we adapt to that, and how can we inspire and create pathways for people who want to transition out of a certain primary industry into diversifying into other income streams, etc. And then the waste and circular economy initiatives. So those are kind of our overarching goals. And this is just touching on what's already happened. So from our previous LTP, and I won't go through all of this, there's a lot there. But in terms of reducing emissions, so we identified a potential 4,000 hectares of land for coastal wetland restoration or rehabilitation. And so we're doing a really big project with the Blue Carbon Initiative at the Waihi Estuary, and that's been really successful. There's a lot of data coming out of that. There's more work to do. We basically, with MFE, purchased some land and with iwi, have retired it and are restoring it and are doing a science study. Jane would probably talk much better about this than me in terms of the detail, but in terms of what you can do for sequestration in that salt marsh wetland retiring of low-lying pasture that's basically not viable anymore. So it's come up a little bit today about the cost of pumping low-lying pasture that's marginal or becoming not viable because of climate change. So if we're not pumping the water out of it to have the fertile soil for agriculture, what else are we doing it apart from an amazing biodiversity win? Are we sequestering carbon? If so, how much is that? And that's that whole blue carbon space. We did the Bay of Plenty risk assessment piece, which was a huge piece of work, which you probably know a bit about that already. I know the staff will know, but and we're looking at partnering with WRC with that as well. And we've got our community-led and iwi adaptation fund, which we've had some amazing success stories come out of that with localised, community-led outcomes and road mapping and decision making, which have been amazing, and some have had a lot of publicity and won a lot of awards because they're sort of really our staff have been working with those communities to enable them to make the decisions they want to make, and they're all community led. They haven't been told what to do, they've had a really broad brief, but we've basically been the catalyst for them to be able to do that work. So we've got more and more of those projects happening. We had Waihi Beach, Ohiwa Harbour, we've had some iwi ones, and we've got more and more coming on the table, and there's more funding for that moving forward. And then in terms of our regional carbon footprint, as Jen said, with Waikato, we've got that data for the baseline for the region in terms of for emission reduction. Next slide, please. So I guess in terms of our action plan work streams, there's the facilitating the adaptation actions and around the region, all of the adaptation planning work, the nature-based solutions, and Jen touched on that as well, and talking about the win-win. But in terms of making room for rivers, all of our infrastructure, our rivers infrastructure, we're now putting, and this is kind of an evolving space, we're now putting a nature-based solutions lens in a more and more significant way across our rivers and drainage, and looking at, is there a possibility that this problem can be solved with a nature-based solution, which is win-win for environment and resilience, and it's long-lasting and doesn't need so much maintenance. So We're doing that where we can. Obviously, we've got pretty grunty flood infrastructure, and that's probably the bulk of regional council's infrastructure is our flood management. But we're weaving in nature-based solutions wherever we can, and sort of transitioning much more to that. And that whole making room for rivers kind of philosophy is something that we're building into our work around flood mitigation. So spatial planning, obviously we all work together on spatial planning. Big part of that, I suppose, for Toi Moana is looking at that resilience and the connectivity of communities. Obviously into that is our public transport and how people move around and connect and stay resilient. So, and that how Te Tile is built into that and not kind of woven out of the picture, that it's very much, the green infrastructure is absolutely fundamental in our spatial planning work. And then, of course, our sort of work in the corporate emissions reduction and what we're doing to enable that and partner with that and provide toolkits for people to do work in that space. And just final slide. I think there is. Oh, yeah, here we go. Yeah. So I won't talk too much about this. This is staff level, but this just kind of illustrates some of the areas where we're already overlapping and working together. I don't know enough about this to really talk to this, but there's the sea level rise viewer. I'll just touch on a few points. And being able to use that tool so that people can actually project and see. And it's a bit scary. I mean, it's kind of one of those double-edged swords, because on the one hand, we'd love to all bury our heads in the sand and not actually face the fact that, you know, there's properties that when you put that on become almost not viable or, you know, into the future, and what does that look like for all of us. But it's important that we are aware and enabled and ready. And our climate change risk assessment input, which I touched on already, our community adaptation planning, the funding initiative for that, which I talked about. And so there's Lake Rotorua Lakes coming into that now. They're new into this, aren't they? Yeah. So those are just some of our sort of cross-council things that we're working together on. But I know that's just a very high-level brief overview, but happy to take any questions and I'll answer them if I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor McMillan. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you very much for a very interesting report. Another one on a roll. You talked about the rivers and your nature-based solutions to managing those, particularly flood management.
Yeah.
Does that apply in this role here? For example, making room for rivers, could you say making room for streams?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I can't tell you case by case what's actually going on in your Rohe Arohamai. I don't have that level of detail. But, yeah, I mean, a lot of the stream situation with cities and towns is about daylighting streams. And, you know, the old school philosophy was concrete over, put culverts in, put pipes in, concrete over, and build on top of that. And now the new thinking is daylight as much as you can, so making room for streams in that sense, and then planting and using those as your connection places for, you know, cycling, walking, dog walking, and all of that. So in terms of spatial planning in an urban environment, that whole sponge city thinking and daylighting streams is very much kind of the lens of now and into the future. And it's if you look at some of the spatial planning that's been done historically, like even talking right outside of Arohe, but with Tamaki Makaurau and the Auckland floods, the Auckland anniversary floods, a lot of the houses and streets that got flooded, in fact, possibly all of them, had the word "wai," as in the Māori word for water, as the name of the street. And, you know, if you talk to iwi, they said, well, we knew those ones would all flood because that's where the streams are. And so those streets are built over the top of those streams. Of course they're going to flood. And so it's kind of looking now, we probably wouldn't be doing things like that if we'd thought like that then. And it's now as councils, I suppose, looking at our responsibility to say, no, that's not viable. And obviously good engineering can get you out of a lot of spaces. And we've been having this conversation quite a lot, haven't we, Councillor Winters, in terms of where is that cut-off from, you know, the best engineering possible versus it is actually not viable to build here. And so it's obviously it's complex, and sometimes developers might err on this side of, yeah, this is possible, and then others might say, no, it's not. And then where is the actual, yep, this definitely is safe for a 500-year whatever projection, and this isn't. So, yeah.
So we might just get Councillor Winters from a local, as a Rotorua representative on the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, just to share something as well.
Thanks, Don, for the question. Yeah, the Nongataha stream springs to mind in terms of a nature-based solution, and Stavros will know this, he's been on the working party. So we're looking at when Nongataha stream comes up to the 5 metre mark, and it comes up very quickly now, when we have those rainstorms come through, we're looking at a proposal to do the AMP showground land, an overland path flicking into Ngāti Whakāwi land, and then rejoining the river just this side of Nongataha, the railway bridge into Nongataha. So that overland flow is sort of taking the pressure off Western Road, and it's still on the drawing board. It's about a $6 million project to do the earthworks. We've got the funding in place to do it, but it's a big job because we, as Kat said, we just can't keep putting stop banks higher and higher because it just doesn't work. And so that one's close to home in terms of a solution for Nongataha stream. And the other one that's a bit further away is at Edgecombe. We are looking at a radial gate designed to flood land in Edgecombe on the eastern side of Edgecombe, and then it joins, we flood it. We've got stop banks, very, very low stop banks. We're going to flood that farmland, and in those bigger downpour events, and the river, the water will eventually join the river back down at Thornton. So those are two projects that are on the cards. They're expensive, and fortunately, we've been able to get some Kānoa funding through, what's the fund? Before the deluge. Yeah. So, you know, those are some solutions that we're pretty close to home. But yeah, when it starts raining up the back of Nongataha, Mamaku, I'm watching our data, and when that river hits 5 metres, I know darn well that Stavros is out with his team, civil defence team, and we are in the throes of evacuating people along Western Road, because we know it just happens so quick now. It's just, yeah.
It's great news for the people of Nongataha. What about the people of Ohinemutu? I think you touched on managed retreat as one of the options, whereas the Utahina stream is blighted by sedimentation caused by human activity. Any thoughts on how we can address that?
Perhaps what I can suggest is that would be a great example of how we could continue these discussions.
Yeah.
I'm not wanting to delve too much into
I could write a book
the
about
detail
that, Don, but I'm
of
not going
specific
to.
Projects.
Yeah.
Okay, one last question, if you wouldn't mind, and this goes back onto the land. So you talked about, in fact, Mayor Tapsell touched on our waterborne threats that we're facing from the gold clam. The ones above ground, I guess you could say, particularly around Okataina, etc., those pesky wallabies.
Yeah.
They are doing enormous damage to our forests.
Yeah.
What's the strategy for dealing with them?
Yeah, I'll probably hand that over to Kevin, because Kevin is a bit of an expert in this, but yeah, we've certainly got a lot going into that space.
So the good news is we're doing a lot in collaboration with Waikato Regional Council because they don't worry about the boundaries, and Kaimai Mamaku's a classic examples. They are in both rohis, and we work really well with Waikato Regional Council. Yep, ground zero was at Okaitaina. And the interesting thing about wallabies is we thought they were sort of contained. And we've got thousands of motion detector cameras, Madam Chair, all around the countryside now, right out to Napier Taupo Road onto Rangatiki, the headwaters of the Rangataiki River. And we're finding the rat bags down there. You know, we thought they were here, but they're actually ones and twos further afield. So we're using our drone technology. We've got some really cool contractors who are right up there with infrared cameras, heat-seeking sights on their guns, and they're going out and they're grabbing these ones and twos, so that and we're trying to push it back into a containment zone. Once we're certain that these wallabies aren't in the biggest patch available, then we'll start hitting the containment zone. But you'll see that wallaby fence between here and Tumanui, the Green Lake. I mean, yep, expensive fence, but it's to stop them leaking through into Ngākuru, Waikiri area from Waka Forest. So those are the sorts of things we've got to do. And interestingly enough, it works, because we've seen footprints along the fence lines where these things have come to a fence, they haven't jumped over, they've actually gone down the fence and then headed back in the bush. So it's working. So those are sorts of things we've got to get our heads around, Don, in terms of, but it's a long-term project, and we got, I think it was about 27 million, Jen, well, the whole country got 27 million for wallabies over 4 years, and we've been there's some more funding out for the next 2 or 3 years to contain wallabies as well. But these things, yep, they're the scourge of our lakes, our bush, everywhere. But I think we're getting on top of them, and that's all I'll say, Mr. Chair. But good collaboration with us and Waikato Regional Council.
Thank you.
We've got a question from Councillor Kiriopa.
Oh, thank you. I haven't kept up on the success or otherwise of Plan Change 10, which to my understanding was looking at land use change in the catchment specifically to protect the lakes. But how was that plan change, or was it looked at in alignment with climate change and the benefits of less intensified farming and how that might benefit the district?
Yeah, I'll probably hand over to Councillor Winters again in a minute, but I suppose that was mainly focused on the nitrogen, wasn't it? And you know, it's funny when you look at something like that, because actually, if you'd bought and retired some of those farms back then, it probably would have cost a lot less than actually going forward with the nitrogen program. So that's kind of panning out, looking at the real big picture and looking far ahead and going, okay, well, what actually would solve this problem? So I think in that sense, it was focused on lake water quality as opposed to transitioning the economy to different land use viabilities, I suppose. But Councillor Winters can talk more to Plan Change 10 if there's anything you want to.
Yeah, we've had significant land use change through Plan Change 10, and I think it's about 5,000 hectares, Lani, that has changed from intensive land use to lesser land use. That's a significant area of land in the catchment of Lake Rotorua. Yeah, we've got the nitrogen buyback scheme. We're about halfway through with that. It's a voluntary scheme, so it hasn't been as successful as we would have liked, but we've got till 2032 to nail that. And but in terms of long-term land use change, there has been significant change, but it was more, as Kat said, it was about nitrogen. It wasn't about climate change or anything like that. But I know Tanya will, this is something that's at the Rotorua Lakes Strategy Group, gets reported on a regular basis. And these are long-term trends that you've got to look forward to. You're just not going to solve this overnight.
Thank you. There doesn't appear to be any further questions. I'll quickly check online. You guys all good? Sorry, a question from Stavros.
Thank you, Your Worship. Because it's a workshop, and I think we should be sharing sort of freely and constructive information between ourselves. And I think for our officers, our staff who work on these issues all the time, if you take into consideration a couple of facts, that if you take the Waikato Bay of Plenty region in rough order, of all our catchments, about 2% are what we call urban environments of the land. And I might be not 100% accurate, but that's the order of distribution of urban versus non-urban rural areas. Is it a fair consideration for all of us as officers and elected members to have? Because we've talked about nature-based solutions. Where we do not have an already existing urban environment, it's a lot easier to actually adjust our behaviors or land use on nature-based solutions.
Yeah.
Where we have established urban environments, and because we are no longer as mobile as we used to be maybe hundreds of years ago, people stay there, should our thinking focus mostly for those environments in reducing the climate change footprint, the emissions, but also increasing the adaptation and resiliency to climate change and these events? Because I think Councillor Patterson mentioned, for example, Hinemutu. It's not an easy consideration to retreat from Hinemutu.
No. Yeah.
Therefore, the focus should be in other parts. It should be mostly around focus on resilience, improving resilience and adaptation, noting that only about 2% of our total catchments are our urban environments.
Yeah.
So our policy development should be really distinguished between the big open spaces where you can do things with nature.
Yeah.
And there are things that your ability to modify existing urban environments is more limited. Is that a fair approach we should consider?
Yeah, I think 100%. I mean, it's like a jigsaw puzzle, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because if you look at a catchment, what you do upstream impacts what happens downstream. So if you just focused on building stop banks to protect the urban area at the bottom, but do nothing upstream, then the stop banks are going to be skyscrapers, eventually, and, that's just not viable. And then you've got the primary industry and the jigsaw puzzle of the push-me-pull-you of, for example, on low-lying pasture, which is the most fertile pasture, the push-me is let's make this viable, let's drain it because of the economic capacity of grazing livestock on it, and the pull-you is the and Jen touched on this, the amount of emissions it creates for one with draining peat soils, but also all of the other things, the livestock that's on there, the emissions they're producing, then the freshwater issues and all of those things. So they're sort of pushing, you've got this push-me-pull-you juxtaposition, and also private land. So you've got huge puzzle to work out, but your thinking is, I totally agree. You have to look at what can you do on scale, and we saw that in Tairāwhiti with, if you plant pines on steep marginal land, something I believe in is no-go, like mapping no-go areas. So you cannot plant there, you cannot farm there, you cannot build there. So the only thing you can plant is native, and that has to be planted, otherwise you're just going to get gorse or whatever, or rewilding pines growing there. So native and left to be native. And if you basically mapped out like that, then you're going to have a significant impact on nature-based solving. I was going to add something else in the mix there, and I can't remember. I've just lost my train of thought with that. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Brown, just checking, did I see you had a question earlier? For Councillor McMillan?
I've got a million questions, but nothing right at the moment. I'd like to be on the committee if there ever is one.
Thank you very much. I think that this again has been incredibly helpful. Thank you very much, Councillor Kat McMillan, for presenting to us, and also, of course, Councillor Winters for assisting with the local answers too. So we'll now hand over to Rotorua Lakes Council. So we have a number of managers joining us. So we've got Craig Goodwin, who is our Manager of Waste and Climate Change. We've got Alison Lowe, just next to him, who is one of our environmental managers. And also we've got Karen Love, who is a climate change analyst. And also joining us, if you don't know them, was Stavros Michael, our GM of Infrastructure and Environmental Solutions, and also Rob Piketli, who's our Manager of Active and Engaged Communities. But without further ado, we'll hand over to Craig, Alison and Karen to cover Rotorua Lakes Council.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you for the opportunity. I really enjoyed the previous presentations and that, and yeah, I guess it's the presentation we're going to give is a little more staff-centric, a little bit more about how the rubber meets the road, if you like. And it's kind of not lost on me that discussions like these originated in Paris on the other side of the world a number of years ago, and with the nationally determined contributions that came out of that, which then gave individual governments the directions that they hand down. And can we have the next slide, Rob? So that's kind of, I guess, here we are, we've got 3 organisations here, we've got 2 regional councils and a council and that, who are very much in that same space where, we're kind of looking at how we can collaborate and work together to, fulfil the directions that have been handed down to us from above. So, and many people here feel personally passionate about that as well. So it's actually a really, really neat space to work in. So we're just going to focus on the Rotorua kind of, what we're doing as staff, for our organisation inside that space, and kind of what our place is in that sphere, where we belong and what we can do, and how we're contributing to that. Before I do start, though, I think, definitely need to acknowledge the other staff that work at the regional councils and that. Jane in particular has done some fantastic work alongside us, with the Bay of Plenty Regional Council and that, and the other staff, the other councils and that. We meet regularly and we discuss and we talk about how we can, work towards these goals. So just kind of looking at the slide there, you can kind of see that we've got our planning kind of process on one side, and the visions handed down to us from our councillors and that, and then we've got our long-term planning and our annual plan. And then we've got our framework of strategies and that, and this is reflective of the different functions and teams and that within council, and this is something that like as staff, we're very aware that we've got all these different functions going on in council. We've got our district plan team, we've got our infrastructure team, doing stormwater. We've got our property team who are managing buildings with, large energy needs. And then, I look after waste management and that, which plays a huge role in terms of contributing towards these goals. And so, along with that, we need to be able to work together so we're not siloed in the way that we're working as an organisation, that we're very aware of what all the other teams are doing and the bits and pieces of work that they're working in. And this is kind of what today is about for us, is we know our place as an organisation through the Rotorua Climate Action Plan. We know our place as an organisation inside of that, And then as you kind of distill that down, each of our functions needs to know its place inside of the organisation and what it's going to do. So the next piece of work for us is to build a climate framework for the organisation, so that inside the organisation, when the rubber meets the road, everybody kind of knows what it is that they're tasked with doing or what they're responsible for. And through that framework and that, we'll definitely be exploring how we can establish some measurability towards meeting those goals. So that's kind of the overall framework of where we're at. Next slide, Rob. Talking again about the size of the problem, and that you can see here, and that we kind of know what our emissions are. And, just following down again, from how, we've been delegated down from national government, and there's two main streams, and you've heard them referred to today. We've got, mitigation of emissions and reducing emissions, and the government has its emissions reductions plan, and then there's the climate adaptation planning which comes down from government, and that kind of flows down through, and that's reflected through the way that we do things as staff. So we're kind of at that area there where we're looking to follow that green line down as far as we can go. And so what we're going to do from now on is, from this point on in the presentation, is I'm going to hand you over to Karen Love, who's our climate analyst, and she's going to talk about the emissions reductions and that we're doing. And then we're going to segue into Alison Lowe, who's going to talk about the climate adaptation measures and things that we're going to be doing as well.
So this slide is a slice of what was shown in the previous slide. So this is year 2021-22, and this is just to show you the relative amounts of these different emissions of the sectors. Could you just, yeah. So these three circles are the areas that Rotorua Lakes Council has influence over. And one of those is not dotted, it's solid. Yeah. And that's because we have more than influence over the area of waste. We essentially control it. It's got 91% of landfill, that's our landfill. 5% is wastewater treatment, and that's our wastewater treatment plant. And the other is individual septic tanks, and we're actively moving people from septic tanks to reticulated sewage. So these are the three areas that I'm going to talk about. So if you flick on. Yeah. So I'll start with waste emissions. So this is emissions from organic stuff, which is thrown out in the red lid bin, or it's flushed down the toilet, essentially. And these emissions are produced in the landfill. It's produced from organic waste, and it forms methane. And so if you can reduce the organic load going into your landfill, you have a big impact on the amount of methane you produce. And about 12 years ago, a large chunk of organic stuff that was put in the landfill, which was the biosolids from the wastewater treatment plant, and biosolids is dewatered sludge, essentially. And this was about 30% of what was going into our landfill at the time. So this was removed, it was taken to Kawerau, it was mixed with wood pulp, and it's now being recomposted. So that's had a massive reduction in emissions of about 2,500 tonne per year, but it freed up a lot of space in the landfill. And then in 2018, our landfill reached end of life, and so it was closed. It was capped, which means that a cap was put on, so the methane coming out was trapped, and that methane is flared, which means it's burnt. So that methane is then burnt to produce CO2. CO2 is still a greenhouse gas, but it is much less potent than methane. And because we are no longer adding to this landfill, those emissions are dropping about 7% per year, and in the last financial year it was 2,500 tonne. So the waste from Rotorua now goes to Tirohia, and this is a very modern, efficient landfill that the methane produced in that landfill is burnt to produce electricity. Going on. So the next sector I'll talk about is stationary energy. So this is essentially energising stationary things like buildings or streetlights or wastewater treatment plants. And generally electricity and natural gas are the two things that energise stationary things. In terms of natural gas, we moved this building, Civic Centre, and also the Sir Howard Morrison Centre next door to geothermal in 2017. And that reduced our emissions due to natural gas, which is methane, by the way, by about 200 tonnes per year. And at that time, it saved us $50,000 in natural gas, but natural gas has increased in price by about 30% since then. We've got two main sites now that use natural gas. One is the library, the other is the crematorium, and the library has reached end of life, essentially, for the boiler. And so we had a feasibility study earlier this year looking at what are the other options that was supported by EGA. In terms of electricity, we've got three main users of electricity for council. The first one is the wastewater treatment plant, so that's treating sewage. The second one is pump stations, so that's just moving water around, essentially. And the third one is street light. So the street lighting in 2022 was moved from HPS, high pressure sodium, to LED. So this is a much more efficient way of lighting. This was supported by Waka Kotahi, and that had a reduction in emissions of about 140 tonnes per year, which had just due to efficiency. And this had a reduction, savings essentially. So that was $120,000 per year saved by doing that. Outside of council, we also support other groups that look at improving sustainability or energy efficiency of Rotorua houses and businesses as well. Okay, and lastly, transportation emissions. That's pretty self-explanatory. That's petrol and diesel, essentially, so reducing that. Within council, we have some council fleet, and we have moved from one council vehicle to, well, one was retired and 5 e-bikes were bought. We have a scooter as well. We have 1 EV, and renewals now are essentially all hybrids. So that's what's going on in-house. But looking at the wider district, how we are supporting people to use their cars less or to change mode. One way you're doing that is with shared paths. So this is to give people a safer option if they want to change their mode of travel to active travel, like the ones you see out there. So since 2016, we've had 67 kilometres of shared path built. That was supported by Waka Kotahi. And every year, council does a count of the commuting cyclists, and the number of people using those shared paths have increased every year, and it's now 90% increase from when we started 2016. Another way we're supporting people using their cars less is by Plan Change 9, which is to increase density close to the urban core. So if people live closer to where they work, where their kids go to school, where they have leisure activities, then they don't need to travel as far. So those are the 3 things I'm going to talk about. If you flick on. This is the next big thing which is in the works, which is Craig's baby. So I'm going to hand over to Craig.
Pardon me. Yeah, so we are going to bring in a food organics and garden organics collection program, a curbside collection program for our district, starting on the 1st of July 2026. So I think this is quite a common thread right across the country where councils have been looking at this, because it is a bit of a low-hanging fruit in terms of waste management and reducing methane emissions from landfill. And the numbers here, like I've worked for several different councils around the country and that, and so for Rotorua, we did a waste assessment of what was inside our red bins and that, and we found that 55% of the red bin was organic material and about 53% of that was divertible material. So even if only 7 out of 10 households put their bin out, you know, for a collection and that, we would still be looking to retrieve about 7,000 to 8,000 tonnes of waste that we could divert from landfill a year, which is significant. And so we divert it from landfill, put it through an alternative processing, and avoid those methane emissions. So composting is one processing method which is by far and above better than landfilling, and then the other option is anaerobic digestion, and we're very fortunate in the Rotorua district to have the big AD plant out at Rotorua, which is a biogas plant. So that was commissioned about 12, 18 months ago, I think, and is currently taking a significant amount of food waste from Auckland. So they won a big contract there, and that technology is very, very promising and is even more efficient than composting. So depending on exactly how it ends up, you know, we stand to have a big win here with getting this in place. And as we said there, we think, you know, like depending on which processing method and that we end up going with, we would be up to 60% reduction in emissions from both transporting and processing when you add it all up. So, yeah, that is definitely a big win for us. I think the other cool thing about this, you know, I was talking before about, the kind of the rubber hitting the road and that, and how people can actually have an impact on decisions that were made on the other side of the world when world leaders got together and then. Individual nations started making commitments towards this stuff, is that this is in the home. This is something that everybody, is exposed to. So even the teenagers that are, jumping out of school on Fridays and waving placards around can see this in action. This is actually climate change happening in the home. So, and I think it's a really looking forward to getting it up and running and getting it going. And so, I'll just hand over to Alison now. Alison's going to talk about climate adaptation.
Kia ora tātou. So when we're looking at adaptation, really we're looking at increasing resilience, and our Rotorua Climate Action Plan, one of the goals was to ensure a resilient community adapting to the changes in climate. So looking at what does that mean, what do we need to increase our resilience to, and through the work that was done, through the with the regional council, looking at our hazards and looking at what our hazards and risks are locally, it's been identified that extreme rainfall, the more frequent and more intense rainfall, is one of our hazards, despite the fact that our similar total annual rainfall is not projected to change. And we're more dry, more days over 25 degrees and more droughts. So those are the things really that we need to increase our resilience to. That's the focus of our work. Thanks. And so what are we doing in terms of, one of our core functions is the provision of infrastructure for our community. So we're looking at safe and reliable wastewater infrastructure that is resilient to climate change. And we have a big project increasing the capacity of our treatment plant to accommodate growth, future growth, but also to accommodate the foreseeable high flows and extreme weather events like we saw during the Nongataha flooding. We also have programs working to reduce the amount of water that can get into our wastewater network and end up at the wastewater treatment plant. So that's increasing wastewater infrastructure resilience. And we're looking at increasing the resilience of our stormwater infrastructure, safe and reliable infrastructure. We have a stormwater master plan that's looked at where we're going to take flows, and like Stavros and Councillor Winters were alluding to, an overland flow path, perhaps on the edge of Nongataha. What we're doing down through the Utahina, which is increasing some detention in the upper parts of the catchment, redirecting some paths and doing work over on the east side to enable growth there. So we're trying to increase the capacity of our network and detain the peak storm flows and release them slowly. And we're able to do that where we have space available in some of the upper reaches of the catchment, but that's not really a solution for the whole of the catchment. So in conjunction with this, looking at our next slide, where we need to look at how we're going to reduce the risk of flooding as well. And we need to look at maybe a little bit more integrated catchment modelling, not just rely on our urban stormwater catchment modelling, so work together with the wider catchment and the streams and for the whole of the Upper Kaituna, so to inform actions and what we need to do moving forward to reduce this risk, and to inform and provide the flood risk mapping to our community. And, you know, we'd really like to get on board and work with the Regional Council to look at those options, because we're at the bottom of, you know, this catchment with the lake right there. So we don't have a lot of room to move and not a lot of room for the water to go. So we feel we need to work jointly on those options. Yeah, next slide. And then a few other things around increasing resilience. We're looking at opportunities to implement where it's effective and to consider potentially district plan provisions in the future. Low impact design concepts and water sensitive urban design. The urban canopy and shade trees. These are things that there's a lot of guidance out there, and people can pick them up and implement them sort of where they choose on your own property or at a development level. But what a future project could be is that we're considering is looking at how we can maybe pull some requirements into our district plan. And I think we'll be informed a little bit more after we've been through the climate framework that Craig alluded to try and identify, okay, what's going to be effective for us and where. And also looking at enhancing biodiversity and restoring our open channels and waterways where we can, and bringing those into our programs. And we've got a lovely picture of the Waikawa Hannes Bay wetland there. And the image on top is only like in the last couple of weeks, where suddenly I think a whole lot of native seedlings became available at a wonderful price. So joint project, really collaboration with the Regional Council, District Council, care groups and TALT have just gone out and planted 2,600 native trees alongside our waterways. Yeah, so that's great to see. Everyone's aware of and thinking along that space, and then we're able to just pick up with those opportunities as they arise and run with them. Right, so that's it for adaptation. Over to questions, I guess. Thank you.
I just thank you, Alison, and the guys. These are all parts of our team here, so I appreciate it very much. Can I make a couple of comments for all of us? I think we have a long way ahead of us, obviously, but we are making some tangible progress in some respects. A little bit disappointing in the last National Land Transport Program we had over the last 5 or 6 years. We added about almost 70 kilometers of shared paths and cycleways, a significant increase of school kids walking and cycling to school, but over the next 3 years, we have zero budgets for that, for the National Land Transport Program. And if you put in the context of what we're trying to avoid here, I mean, if we get our target of 10% of school kids going to school and other commuting transportation, it would save about 20,000 vehicle movements a day. We've made a lot of progress in the last 4 or 5 years, but right now we seem to have stalled. So it's a work in progress, to follow from there. The second thing is, as Greg said, we continue to minimize our waste to landfill, and obviously if we are successful with the FOGO, probably will be almost 2/3 of all our waste generated, is diverted from landfills, a significant piece of improvement there. But the biggest message we all need to have here, I think we want to pass to everyone, is that we need to collaborate with each other. There's no single bullet or silver point that solves all our problems. And if we are talking about, the adaptation to and resilience, obviously to manage the system in totality, we need to protect our water courses and streams and rivers, and obviously appropriate diversion of pollutants, like our sewage, airborne pollution, sedimentation, making way for waters on secondary flow paths and so on. It requires all parties' collaboration, and I think that's, if we have a message, that's the single most important message you can get between us today. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And then certainly from an elected member perspective, and I know when the work was undertaken for our emissions audit was very interesting. So there are things that we can do as a council. There's obviously emissions that are in our community that we can't control, but putting that actually into climate change plans were fantastic. But I do note our one, some other ones, they have been a few years ago now, so it could also be an opportunity for us to look at doing this together. But I also know that regionally there's other work such as natural hazards mapping that's going on that I think will influence these. But finally, just certainly the flooding continues to be the biggest concern for us, where I think we could be working a lot closer together as elected members as well. The only 2 civil defence emergencies that have ever been declared in Rotorua were flooding, and we don't, if there's anything that we can do to prevent another one having to be declared in future, then I think that's of utmost importance to protecting people and protecting property. So we'll open up for any questions now, if there are any. Councillor McMillan.
Oh, kia ora, thank you. No, really interesting. And I totally core what Mayor Tapsell was saying, absolutely. I just wonder, one of the many things I've always thought is really cool about Rotorua is that vision of the most cycle-friendly region in the Motu. And I'm just to Stavros's point about, with the National Land Transport Plan and the disappointment there, which I totally share. Have you ever put a case forward to central government in terms of like the tourism, so the economic gains from the work you're doing in the cycle space and making everything connected in Rotorua, which includes the urban paths, not just redwoods and not just the mountain biking, in terms of like the value add to the economy by progressing those rather than stalling them?
Thank you. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And obviously, we have been waiting until early September when the National Land Transport funding decisions were made, and now we know. But I've noticed yesterday we received a letter from 2 ministers, Bishop and Brown, I think, and they're inviting us to identify projects which are currently unfunded, that will be based on business cases that are under the National Infrastructure Program. And we just got a letter yesterday, so I think this is our intentions actually to put programs like that, because walking and cycling, other than all the benefits it derives, is also a significant economic tool in our arsenal for visitors and so on. So yeah, we will be doing that.
Thank you. Councillor Winters.
Can I also respond to Stavros about our public transport that we provide for Rotorua? We've actually done really well with getting people onto buses in Rotorua. We've seen considerable increase in patronage in the last few years. And it's because of our students who are getting on the public transport, and there's no charge for students. However, it's caused a dilemma. Currently, our fare box revenue is about 13%. The Crown, probably Jen, you're in the same position too. The Crown has said that's too low. We want to see a fare box revenue of around 30% going forward. Which means one thing, those students who go to school for free in the morning and the afternoon, it's going to have to change, which is a real bugger. Because when you get students going to school, it's a mindset change that public transport is okay to drive, to use, and they go on in their life and they still carry on using public transport. So we're in the throes of a public transport fare review program. How do we make sure that our kids get to school on buses as opposed to mum and dad driving them every day? And we're at a crossroads because the Crown has said, as I said, they want us to go to 30% fare box revenue, which is a tragedy because we know this current system's working. Yeah, okay, there's targeted rates across everybody. Tauranga people hate it because it's so high. Rotorua people, it's livable because I think it's about $160 a year. But, you know, for getting kids to school, it's a really good system. But we're in a dilemma, and we're going to have to sort it out fairly soon. You're probably the same too, Jen, in terms of that fare box recovery.
Thank you for that contribution, Councillor Winters. We had a question from Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Worship. Just going back to an earlier comment I think you made, Jen, about casting an environmental lens over pretty much everything that you do in Council. Thinking about the FOGO plan that we're about to get underway here, 4 bins, so currently everybody has 3 going to 4, and the future development strategy talks about the intensification of the central part of Rotorua and other urban nodes. If what I saw in Auckland the other day, the number of apartments that have no parking at all, let's say we have 20 apartments built somewhere that are a similar design in Rotorua, that's 80 bins. Where are they going to go? Maybe we should be thinking about that in our building code, that if we ever permit this kind of intensification, they have to factor in where those bins are going to be kept, because otherwise it could be a problem. Just a thought.
I could add something briefly. Just coming from Germany originally, I mean, there are some great examples from dense spaces of how things are done well. I think we don't have to reinvent the wheel with it. But the thinking about it, like you raising it and it getting addressed, super important, because going from one to another has the potential of unintended consequences. Totally agree.
Thank you.
Your Worship, Mayor. Yeah, I just want to add to that in the recent Plan Change 9 changes in that, we were, as a waste team, asked to, submit on exactly those kind of issues. And one of the things we did submit was that if with the creation of retirement villages and those kind of intensified living systems, and that they do actually make allowances for rubbish trucks and emergency vehicles to be able to enter the facility and then exit the facility without any reversing manoeuvres and things like that. And that they do actually think of and consider things like space for bins, whether that be individual bins, set of bins for individual residences, or whether they use communal bins, bin systems and stuff. So, yeah, that stuff does come by us, and we do get to have a say on it.
Thank you. Just checking if there are any further questions. Yep, Councillor.
It's not so much a question, it's just that conversation on pretty much anything. I've got something else to add if there aren't any other questions. One thing I've neglected to mention from my presentation was we're doing some really cool work with Rotorua iwi at the moment. And so it simply was born out of the fact that they had their climate strategy ready and presented to our joint management agreement meeting. We have our climate action roadmap ready, and now some of our staff are working with them to align where the commonalities are. And we've got a little work group happening with myself and staff from Rotorua and staff from Regional Council. And we've identified, obviously, there's a lot of things where it aligns with Regional Council, but actually there's a lot of things that would align with the District Council. So it's hoping to extend that conversation, partly through these, when I head to, say, South Waikato or Matamata Piako District Council, to extend an invitation to make it a grouping, work group that includes the district as well. So just something to consider here if you don't have something like that already. And then the next point I was going to make was There was a graph earlier, and this is not an attack on that graph as such. It's just that you see it very often where the emissions line over the years is fairly steady, and then there's that green line that goes straight down because there's a necessity to get to 2050. It gets steeper every year as we keep plateauing in a way, and it's all over the place at different organisations and otherwise. But I think that with the governance hats on that we have, we've got to have a think about how we do things a bit differently. And I realise that while there are these staff collaborative things happening in the background, it might be the governance people getting together, the elected members getting together across councils to really understand some of these topics, whether it is the local climate risk assessment and why that progress is stalling, or whether it is the really getting to know the impacts so that there's enough of a group to push for something, because it seems that some of the great things we've had come from a vision of politicians as such. I think of, say, Te Huia, our train, that we have going from Hamilton to Auckland, and I think about a train perhaps going from Hamilton to Tauranga, or say down to capital connections with Wellington, but that stuff doesn't happen kind of by itself and by a couple of staff having a great idea. It's driven by a cross-council collaboration of elected members. So I think to address something like that and actually make some of these gains, we might have to have a think about some of the potential working groups, whether it's in community transport or how to solve the 3 years of no funding in public transport, but what can we do? And whether it's working together proactively on clams or wallabies, or whether it is to have a better relationship with central government so that we don't end up with those situations. Because we have one in Hamilton at the moment where we've got a new suburb called Peacocks, which was built for very little parking, and now we have no ability to put on buses for the next 3 years, but people are starting to move in, right? So it sets all the wrong kind of infrastructure. That requires a good relationship between local government and central government to not allow these discrepancies to occur, and it's power in numbers to get together. So I just wanted to put the call out to just have a consideration of getting together on something we care about. It doesn't have to be everything. Climate is broad. But if there is something that is really tickling somebody's fancy, let's give it a go.
Thank you, Councillor Nichol, and I think just not wanting to lose the momentum of what has been a great start of working together, perhaps I suggest within the next fortnight, if there's something that elected members believe this is something that we feel will be a priority across the councils, we could just by email confirm that and just start to get progress underway for that. Might be a good suggestion. Councillor McMillan.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I was just, I remembered the thing that I was going to say as part of my answer to Stavros's question, which was really about I suppose, the just transition and the reality that mostly iwi Māori are in the most vulnerable places. So if we're looking at what we're doing, some of our community are most at risk, and what does that look like? And also things in terms of some conversations I've had with tangata whenua, with things like having energy sustainability, so things like solar or wind on marae, papakainga, and what all of that looks like, as well as sort of waste and that kind of self-sufficiency, sustainability. And I know there's some good stuff happening with Te Arawa in that space, but I suppose it's always having that lens that we have mana whenua at the table with these discussions, and that we are partnering in that way as well as elected members, but with iwi as well. And I really support what Jen's saying, that and that's sort of been said here, that if we work together, we can solve some of these problems. I know staff do, but in the governance space, and I think that bite-sized chunk philosophy could probably work best, where we have a very specific topic that there's a problem that needs solving, rather than going, right, we've got this climate change governance forum, what are we going to talk about today? You know, it's just so big, it's so big, that if we have like regionalised, very pinpointy issues that we are working on together in a governance space, then I think we actually get some outcomes out of that, probably more than if we keep it really broad. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I'll just invite my Rotorua Lakes councillors if there's any additional comments that you wish to add to this discussion as well. Councillor Barker. Councillor Barker is our chairperson of our Infrastructure and Environment Committee.
Thank you. I've just been doing a lot of listening and absorbing of the information. Thank you very much for sharing. I think that the collaborative approach is going to be where our strength lies. It's going to be in choosing the projects going to be challenging, because you're right, it's quite a lot of projects that we could be investing our time into. So yeah, I think, as the Mayor Tapsell has said, for us in Rotorua, there are many issues, and we're doing some good work in some of the waste spaces and all the modes of transport, all those things. But I think flooding is probably one of the things that is one of our key risks for a wide range of people in our community. So, and it's a space where we can work really well together into. So that would be a space I'd like to see some work done in together. Thank you.
I think so. Really excited about what you've done. Thank you, Jenny. And you know, I've been a part of the Rōpū and seen there's actually a million things that councils can do together. Like, this is a really high-level overview, but there are a whole lot of things that are actually low-lying fruit that can be done very quickly and very easily. So, you know, I wholeheartedly support a group being formed to identify those things and to get those things rolling. I think my day job, I'm sure most of you will know, is climate change in the iwi space. One thing I do want to say is, like, wonderful that you're working with Raukawa, but one thing councils need to take into account is that iwi are in different positions. Like, some are post-settlement iwi, so they've actually got settlement funds, so they have the capacity to be able to engage with councils, and lots, in particular Te Arawa, are not post-settlement. So you have hapu and iwi that actually don't have any monies to pay anyone to be involved in these. And so it's all voluntary, and, you know, people with good intentions, but often with no capability, you know, they don't have the funds to bring in people who would be able to engage in some of these, or support engagement in some of these. I'm just raising that as something to think about. But yeah, please let's set up a working group. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I think we'll wrap up there. But once again, thank you very much to everyone who's taken the time to put together a presentation to share the great work that we are already doing, and also the great opportunities that are coming up. So I think Councillor Kiriopa is correct. There could be some low-lying fruit for us to work on together. But I also definitely take on board the action that perhaps within the next fortnight we'll get in touch and start to set something up for the next steps. So once again, thank you very much everybody for your time, including those who have joined us online. And I will just close our meeting now with a karakia. Kia whakairi ai te tapu, kia wātea ai te ara, kia turu ki whakataha ai, kia turu ki whakataha ai. Haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. Thank you very much, everyone, and I'd like to invite those who are present, if you'd like to join us for a quick cuppa before you head on off to your next hui. Thank you.